I'm dropping into your feed to say that Changes Big and Small will be back next week. This season, the focus of the podcast is on relationships. If you would like to talk about relationships with me, if you have some sort of expertise on either friendships, intimate relationships, family relationships, or work relationships, then reach out to me and you could be a guest on the podcast. Go to changesbigandsmall.com to access the guest form or email me at contact@changesbigandsmall.com. In the meantime, I was recently on the Be Your Own Kind podcast, and I have a snippet of my conversation with Renita, who was a guest in episode 34. Listen to the excerpt and then follow the link in the show notes to hear the rest of the episode on Be Your Own Kind podcast. And now to my interview with Renita.
I checked out your blog and I came across when it was in April 2020, you wrote something every day.
Yeah.
And I remember the blog that was about the correct way to utilize a to-do list, because you're right. Most of us put 6 or more items on our to-do list and then we're overwhelmed and none of it gets completed. But not only do you have to put the items on the list, you might need to schedule when you want to, get those things done, and it's less taxing. So that was
Exactly.
pretty helpful.
Yeah, and I still consider my calendar to be my best friend. And so with doing so many things, I was just talking to a friend yesterday and she was saying how she knows this person who seems to have a lot of time but never gets things done on time. And so I was like, yeah, there is this myth, I guess it's real, that if you want something done quickly, you give it to a busy person because they're going to schedule it and they're going to get it done. And I feel like that's me a lot of the time, where if I put it in my calendar, it gets done. And so I use my calendar a lot that way.
Yeah, that was a good tip. I mean, I used to put things in my calendar and was like, oh, snooze, kind of like waking up in the morning. But now it's like, okay, you set this time, you have to do it within this time, and I read somewhere, I don't know the exact technical name for it, but basically there are type of people that their mind just wander. So that's another reason why they can't get things done. Like, I'll start the task and then I'll start thinking about, man, what I want for dinner tomorrow. Not today, tomorrow. What am I gonna do on Sunday and it's Monday? So that takes a lot of time. Then when I snap out of it, 2 hours has passed.
Well, that's a good point. And actually kind of going down the scheduling calendar rabbit hole, basically, sometimes I do the same thing where I put something on my calendar and it doesn't get done. And then I have to investigate, why did this not get done? And especially if it's something that's repeating, maybe I need to remove this off my calendar if I'm going to keep snoozing it or not getting it done. Like, my calendar is not a place where I put things just in case. It's a place where I put things because I really want to do them at that time. And
Right.
So if it's a placeholder that's not getting done, then I need to take that thing out, because I don't want my calendar to become a snooze space.
Right, and it defeats the purpose.
Exactly. Exactly. But it's interesting because if some of your listeners have trouble with calendars, I was watching this productivity video this morning, and I'll share the link with you. I don't remember the name of the person who created it, but he was going through all of the different productivity tips. And one of the ones he shared was the thing that has to get done each day. I don't remember what it's called, but you just have one thing that if you did that, if you accomplished it that day, you would consider that you had a successful day. So it's just one thing. So this is my must do. Maybe it's called a must do list. And everything else is the can do, should do, will do, maybe do, everything else. But it's just that, because sometimes I think people can get a bit overwhelmed with, oh my goodness, there's so many things on my to-do list. Well, if you break it down and think, what is the absolute one that I need to get done, then you can have a sense of accomplishment, which can be very encouraging for the next day.
It is very encouraging. Nothing is more liberating than scratching something off.
Absolutely, yes. I think probably we may be from the same school, where you put something down on the list just so that you can cross it off.
Yes, I have the calendar and I have the written planner just so I can have that satisfaction.
Exactly. So yeah, we take our little wins wherever we can get them.
And as I mentioned earlier, you have a podcast entitled Change is Big and Small. What inspired you to start that podcast?
I mostly started the podcast because people kept saying, and in fact, a friend just said this to me last night, and she was like, "Oh, you're so brave. Like, people tell me this all the time." And I don't think there's anything special or brave about me. I think that all of us has this capability. And so the main reason for starting the podcast was to kind of explore this concept of change, because usually the bravery is related to making change or taking chances. And I think, well, I think all of us do that in some areas. So let's unpack how do different people explore this area of change and unfamiliar situations to see what we can learn that we can apply in our own lives, so that we can actually decide what do we want and go for it and achieve it.
I love that, because you're right. We don't all react to change identically. You know, we have our own way. I don't even think we process it the same. I think it's just a personal journey. It depends on the person, because the same thing can happen to 10 different people, and most likely they'll all react to it 10 different ways. So
Exactly. But then all of us are here, right? And all of us are here, and we've gone through difficult things. We've gone through unexpected things. So we've had to have some sort of change management. But sometimes we don't realize the patterns. And so, kind of like what we were just talking about earlier, where it's okay, let's unpack that. And then we can actually kind of build that road and see what the journey was, which I really enjoy that whole experience, and talking to people and making that discovery with them, getting people to tell their story, really.
yeah, because I believe I interviewed someone who had wrote a book about her life, and she was hesitant about it at first because she was like, "Who wants to hear my story?" And then when she released the book, so many people were inspired by it. Like, we feel like, you know, life just, you know, kicking us around, but then when we share our experiences with other people, it actually inspires people, you know, and let them know that they're not alone, you know, in what they had to go through, you know. So
And there's also that element of vulnerability, right? Because
right.
early in the podcast, I used to I still spend too much time, but I used to spend so much time editing the podcast, and I would remove a lot of my own stories, like when I was trying to say, because I was like, nobody wants to listen to stuff about me. They're here to listen to my guests. And the feedback I got again and again was, where are you in this interview? Like, we're listening to a conversation. We want to hear your perspective too. And I realized that I was kind of thinking wrongly about it, that in conversation, there are two sides. It's not just one part of the story. And that's what I didn't know that I learned through podcasting. Thank you for listening. I hope you will go and listen to the rest of the interview, and tune in next week for another episode of Change is Big and Small, starting on the topic of relationships. Remember, change begins with one small step. Have a great week.